Okay, so this is going to be a very brief demo on the engraving process. This is the engraving tool, and it looks kind of strange. I think when you see it by itself, let's put it against white, it looks broken, doesn't it? It has this crazy angle on here, and that's really on purpose because it's meant, if you imagine my hand right now is your plate, you're placing it really flat against the plate and then pushing away from yourself. So if the tool was completely straight, your knuckles would run into the surface of the plate. So it's meant to be pushed with like the palm of your hand against that surface. Your hand won't be able to get around it unless it had that curve or that bend in it. So I'm going to see if I can try to show it from another angle. There we go. See how it looks like the handle's kind of sticking up? That's so that you can get your hand around it on this end. Oh, this is so hard to do. On that end and be able to push it away from you. Come on, focus for me. So I'm going back to the image that I started as a dry point just to show you how the tool is going to work to make a line. So the trick with this tool is that the tip of it is very, very sharp. And so you do kind of, not violently, but you do kind of start it by pressing it a little bit in to the surface with a little bit of force. But then you're going to lower the tool almost completely parallel to the plate that you're working on. I have just a little bit of height there underneath my tool. So I can kind of slide a piece of paper in there, but I don't want to have it at a really high angle or it won't work. In fact, if I have it at this crazy high angle and I push on it, it's really just going into the surface. It's not going across. And so you'll know you're doing it wrong with this tool, with the engraving BURIN. You will know you're doing it wrong if you start to get pain in your elbow joint and if the tool isn't moving. And then if you start to see your hand shaking like that, then you know you're putting a ton of pressure, it's not going anywhere, and as soon as you get weaker and your hand kind of lowers like this, it'll suddenly shoot off across the surface and scratch it in a way you don't want. So the trick is engage it, lower it, and then gently push. And if you probably can't see on the screen, but at the very tip, can you see a little bit of stuff kind of sticking out? That is the plastic being removed in that tiny little line, and that line is where the ink is going to stick. But that plastic that is now gone, that would have been the burr if you were using a dry point needle. It would have been the part sticking up. So that's what's going to make the difference here. This line is going to be very, very smooth. When it prints, it's not going to have the feathery edge that your dry point lines do. The tool is much more challenging to use. The dry point needle is very much like drawing. You can just kind of move your hand and it does what you want. This tool can be a little harder to get used to. So you might want to practice on a scrap piece of paper, or plastic, I mean, or you might consider using the back of your dry point plate to practice with. I'm trying to do one continuous line that is also a curve. And you can see that I can kind of reposition the plate as I go. See how that's all pretty much one cut right there. So you can do organic shapes and you can do curves for sure. You can also pull neat little tricks, like instead of moving your hand that's pushing the tool, you can try to move the plate into the tool itself. Once I get it going here, I can keep my hand in one position. I haven't really moved my tool hand at all. But notice that I'm using my opposite hand to guide the plate into the tool. So those lines don't stick up the way that your dry point marks do. The dry point marks over here are still kind of rough. The ones that I just did with the engraving tool, you almost don't feel it with your fingertip. And I want to say, Raven, we were talking about your piece at the very end of the day and you were worried that they weren't deep enough. So I suggested taking your fingernail and going across it to see if you could feel it go into the groove. And you can't hear it, but it's making a little click. It's going down into that groove that I just made, even though my fingertip doesn't really feel it. So the engraving tool is going to look weird. It looks broken. It looks like it requires a lot of pressure. It doesn't. So easy does it with this one. Engage, lower, gently push. If you're pushing too hard, you'll know, because you'll get pain in your elbow, you'll start to shake, it'll just really tense up, and then once you get at the right angle, it'll suddenly shoot away from your hand and leave a scratch that you don't want. So I would definitely recommend trying with a little practice maybe on the back of your dry point plate before you really commit to using this particular tool. I actually went to a seminar once that was called Engraving, It Doesn't Have to Be Hell on Earth, because I was so frustrated. I kept fighting the tool and I was like using more and more pressure and just making these marks that weren't working. The guy who gave the seminar at one point wasn't even looking at it. He was just sliding his hand in and out and the tool was just making these beautiful curving lines, but it was because he was not pushing too hard. So it will make a scratch, it definitely will, and that's where your ink is going to stick, but it's going to do that in a way that is less rough than the dry point. Now, when you print it and you show it to your friends, oh look, here's my dry point, here's my engraving, they are not going to see a difference. You will when you look at your own really close. The dry point line when it prints has a little feathery edge. It can skip in and out, it can go from thick to thin. The engraving line is going to be much smoother, much more consistent. To me, the best analogy is that the dry point kind of looks like pencil on paper, kind of rough. And the engraving looks more like a nice pen on smooth paper. So it is still going to be a linear style. It's still hatching and cross-hatching, following contours. But the big difference is when you look at it up close between your own two pieces, you'll really see a difference in the line quality. It may not be obvious to non-printmakers, but you'll see it in your own work for sure. Does that make sense, John? Okay. You know where everything is, so if you want to go ahead and start tearing paper or soaking paper or inking and wiping,